Hello, I am Margaret Mary Knapp Olsen. I was born 1918 at the time of the World War ended, and my grandfather on my father's side came from Germany. I haven't got the name of the town handy with me, but I do have it someplace. And my dad was born in Germany too, and he came over here as a young man with 3, 4 of his brothers at the same time. And on my mother's side, my grandfather was born in New York, and his wife was born in New York, my grandmother. And my grandfather's parents were born in New York, and my great-grandfather's parents were born in New York. My mother always said she thought we had come over sort of with the Pilgrims or the Puritans or William Penn or something like that, because the time does go back there. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, and my great-great-grandfather. And my grandfather fought in the Civil War, and Mom says that there was always some of our family fighting in each war. In the Revolution, there was a family of Ferrises that fought in the Revolutionary War. So my generation on my father's side, on my mother's side, goes back, way, way back. I don't just know about my grandmother on my mother's side. Her name was Case, Mary Case Ferris. And somehow or another, I think some of her relatives came down from Canada, but I don't just know for sure. So that is an outline sort of my background, of where my generation was. I had, my father died at the time of the World War, just as the World War #1 was coming to an end in October, that flu epidemic. My mother was 2 months pregnant with me in October, and my dad and my mother both went to the hospital in the same car with the flu. That was the last time my mother saw my dad, George Knapp. He died, he was buried the day I was born, a preemie. I was born October 17, 1918, and that was the day he was buried. And my mother was so sick with the flu and giving birth to me, they didn't tell her he died, because they knew at that time, because she wouldn't be able to handle it. And later on, the doctor scolded her and told her she had to quit feeling sorry for herself, because she had to snap out of it and live, because she had the flu too, besides having this here baby and her husband dying. And the doctor said, you have to be a mother to 3 girls now. You have to live. You have to be a mother and a dad both. So she did live. And when I was out of the hospital and Mom was back in the country, my Aunt Hazel Knapp came over to visit, and when she left, she said, that baby of Sarah's will never make it. And in them days, they didn't have incubators in the hospital like they do now. They had heated bricks. And if my mother had not given birth to me in the hospital, I never would have lived, because they didn't expect me to live either, because I was preemie I was 2 months preemie. So my dad was a Catholic, and there was a Catholic hospital at that time in Bemidji, Minnesota. And the nun named me, and they baptized me. Mom didn't have anything to do with it, as far as I know. And so that's how I got the name of Margaret Mary. A nun named me. And of course they baptize babies when they don't think you're going to live right away. So, but I did manage. The Lord blessed me into having a life, and my mother also, although she was sick at the time. She had a bad thyroid that needed surgery real bad. And we didn't get help from the welfare like you do now. We just mother got a little widow's pension for once in a while, but nothing was secure. And then when I was about a year old, the whooping cough went around, and I had whooping cough, and I had convulsions, and I was a sickly child. And then I was left with ear problems that drained and ached all the time. And so that's the way that went. When I was going to be 6 in October, but Mom sent me to school, although the school board said I was not ready to go to school yet, because I had been so sick in a preemie and everything. But Mother sent me to school anyway, even though my birthday was in the latter part of October. So I had quite a tussle in school. The first year I went to school, this is a joke, I had a messy desk. And the teacher there were no men, usually in them days, if there was a man in the family, they had more respect for the family. And then a lot of times the man would be on the school board, and then they'd really have respect for the school children. Well, I didn't have either. And I was sick and puny, and the teacher didn't like me very good. I had a messy desk, and she put a sign on my desk that said, "Pig pen." I didn't really care if that sign was there or not. It didn't bother me all that much. But my younger sister, which was 5 years older than I am, her name was Julia Knapp, it bothered her. So after a day or two went by, the teacher said, "If you want to straighten up her desk, I'll take the sign down." So Julia came over and cleaned up my desk. I don't know how a desk can get too messy when it's just a little teeny square thing. Anyway, and then I used to bite my erasers off my pencils. I never sucked my thumb, but I'd bite and chew everything I could find. And one day, we lived way out in the country, so I never got to town very often. But one weekend, the teacher did get to town, and she bought a nipple that you put on a baby's bottle at that time. And she came to school the next day, and she gave me that nipple to chew on. Well, I thought that was the greatest thing. It didn't bother me at all. I thought, I'll take it home and I'll have it for my doll. So I took it home with me that night. And lo and behold, she didn't want me to have it and enjoy it. So she had one of the older boys come over. We didn't live very far from the school at that time. I'll tell you why later. But one of the boys came over and said, "The teacher wants that nipple back." So I had to give her that nipple, and I never did see it again. I thought I'd throw that in as something to laugh about. My sister, I had another sister by the name of Clara, Irene Knapp. She was 7 years older than I was. And when I was in school the first year, she was in the 8th grade, just going out. Well, I didn't make the 1st grade. I was in the 1st grade the 2nd year. And so in the meantime, after the 2nd year was through, my mother moved. So I went to another school. And the other school was a long ways from the schoolhouse. We had to go by what you called a bus. But the bus was just a sled if it was winter time, or a wagon if there was no snow, driven by a horse team. And then we had a little heater inside. It was a little house built on top of the wagon or sled. And inside the wagon, or sled, whichever we used, there was a little stove. We called it an airtight stove. It was just a little one, throws a lot of heat, but it's quick, and it kept us comfortable. We had several miles to go by bus. It seemed like it must have been about 8 miles or more, but I don't remember for sure. And so I remember one time some of the kids would get out, the bigger kids would get out, and they'd walk along with the bus instead of ride in the bus. And one day my sister and some other kids were out walking, and the driver to the team got the team running. Well, of course, there was no way they could catch up to the bus in that speed. So they ran and ran and ran. Finally, the bus driver slowed down to let them get back in the bus again. So that was something to sort of laugh about, too. And then when we moved to the other place, where we were closer to school. I didn't have to go by bus. I could walk. Easter time came along, and we had colored eggs, and I thought them were the greatest thing. So I took colored eggs to school for my lunch, and I thought that was a great treat, just because they were colored. So anyway, going back to my generation again, my mother's mother, Mary Ferris, passed away 1 year before I was born. And then at the time when I was a year old, my grandfather passed away. So there were 3 deaths, all within about 3-4 years of each other there. And that made it hard for my mother, too, because Grandpa said he would help run the farm after Dad died. But Dad had some spirited horses, and my grandfather had only 2 fingers on his right hand. The other 3 fingers, from the little finger, the middle, up to the middle finger, they were cut off from a sawmill accident earlier. And he wrapped the harness of the horses around his hand, and the horses got spirited, and they dragged him, and he twisted that hand of his, and he was taken to the hospital, and gangrene set in on that hand. So he died when I was about a year old, and Grandfather was in the Civil War. My grandfather, Cassius Ferris, he was in the Civil War. And when they came from New York, Cassius Ferris came from New York and settled in Wisconsin. Now, I do not know where he married my grandmother, if it was in Wisconsin or not. But anyway, my grandmother had five children, and my mother was the youngest. So they came by covered wagon from Wisconsin to Little Falls, Minnesota. And the weather got so bad, it was either in the fall or in the winter time. So they stayed in Little Falls for the winter and made some friends, and they stayed with. And then in the spring, they went on up to Bemidji, Minnesota. Their aim was to go to Canada. I think we had some relatives on Cassius Ferris's side in Canada. And I know there are some Ferrises up there where my daughter lived, and around Winnipeg, some Ferrises. So if they were related or not, I do not know. But I think that's why he wanted to go to Canada, to be with some relatives. And when we got to Bemidji, Minnesota, my grandmother was getting crippled up bad with rheumatism. And she said, this is far enough north, I'm not going any further. So they got to Bemidji. Bemidji was an Indian settlement, and the white people were just taking Bemidji territory away from the Indians. But so that was sort of a scary deal in a way, but still the Indians were nice. Because one time my grandfather had a wagon load, I don't know, lumber, I think, a wood he took to Bemidji to sell. And he got to the river, and there was no bridge there then, and the river was sort of wide and deep at the time, the Mississippi River. And he was wondering what he could do. And there were about 4 or 5 Indians on the other side of the river. Well, them Indians came across the river, and they helped my grandfather take the team across the river. So that was very, very nice of them. Very nice. Indians are nice people, just as nice as anybody else. There's bad and there's good people in all generations. And they were treated bad. And there's a statue in Bemidji to this day with the Indian looking across the lake, and they call it Chief Bemidji. That's an Indian name for the chief that was there at the time when Mom and Dad, Grandma and Grandpa came there. But it wasn't pronounced Bemidji, but in English, I guess it was Bemidji, but his name was completely different, like if you saw it. But anyway, they always said they named it after Chief Bemidji. And he had his hand up over his forehead, like he was looking across the lake. And we have 2 lakes in Bemidji. One is a big one, where we had Diamond Point and lots of good swimming places, which was a big lake. And you go across, the Mississippi River joined the 2 lakes. So we had a bridge going over the river. And on one side of the river was Lake Bemidji. And on the other side was Lake Irvin, which wasn't that big a lake, and it wasn't that popular a lake. But they had a Diamond Point in Lake Bemidji, and tourists used to come there. And they would have picnics, and even could stay overnight, I think, in some areas. And every 4th of July, we would go there and have a picnic. It was a lovely place for a picnic. You could have, the water was there, and there were swings for the kids to play on, and there was a lake that was good for swimming. We all would go down there and have a lovely time. And I remember my Aunt Celia, my mother's sister. her name was Celia Hannah. Her husband's name was Edward. I think it was Edward anyway. We called him Ed, Edwin or something. And we called him Ed, Uncle Ed and Aunt Celia. And she would always bring a great big watermelon. Well, that was a treat to us little kids. We thought that was wonderful. About the only melon we had all year. So there were some good things that happened in my childhood. But I think I will close for now and start in some other time later.